Welcome, and thank you for joining us today at the interview between the Impulse Network and Lorenz Beringer, the founder of LOBECO, a social media and digital marketing agency based here in Munich. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
My name is Julien Petrat. I'm representing the Impulse Network, a St. Gallen-based, student-led non-profit organization. Our goal is to foster the intergenerational dialogue between current experts from in and around the sports business industry together with international students. On the Impulse Summit 2021, we are inviting experts to set new impulses for change in the industry, and we'll be talking under the overarching motto, Lessons Learned. For the past 4 years, we have partnered up with LOBECO, a German-based social media and digital marketing agency, and together we are joined by Lorenz Beringer, the founder of LOBECO. Given his past role as the head of social media and CRM manager at FC Bayern Munich, he has a great understanding of the sport industry and also the social media strategies, and thus will be able to give us very valuable insights about sponsorships and the evolution during the past years and the years ahead.
Julia, thank you very much. Great that you're here. It's great that we have time to discuss current topics in sports industry and especially about sponsoring. And I remember, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago when I was sitting in the bus between our offices in Zurich and Munich, and Clemens called me.
Yes,
the founder, and I think the first president, and he told me about your idea, what you want to set up in St. Gallen, and I think it's great. Why? Because I think the sports industry is such a traditional industry, very successful, with a long history, but it needs new ideas and new perspectives. Yes. And I think now it's the 4th time for the Impulse Summit, and I think what you brought in the sports industry already by choosing the right topics and the setup, so it's very fresh and dynamic, and what you created already throughout the last years, I think it's a perfect start. Also the way how professionally you set up everything.
Thank you.
Always a great team, and so keep it up, and now I'm very happy to discuss this with you.
Thank you very much. LOBECO as an important partner for the last 4 years now. Thank you for supporting us. Looking at the sponsorship, how would you define sponsoring, and how has the definition of sponsorships evolved over the last 10 to 20 years?
Well, I think sponsoring has a long history. If we look back in the early 70s, one example at that time is the first jersey sponsorship in the Bundesliga in Germany, which was Jägermeister actually for Eintracht Braunschweig at that time, and the German Football Federation had a problem, and they asked, is this really needed? Do we really need sponsors now on jerseys? Which is a normal thing today, right?
Nowadays.
And at that time, it was basically the decision of board members to invest in sports clubs, or let's say to invest in sponsorships in sports clubs or federations. Why? Because they just loved the sport, or they loved athletes, or federations and clubs. And so it was mainly, most of the time, a decision of individual needs and interest. Sometimes it's still the same today, as we all know, right? And then over the decades, sponsorships have been closed because of awareness. Because brands want to have awareness and also image transfer from the discipline, from the sports, to their organization, to their brand, and to their product. And it worked for a long time, and also today still it's the same. But over the time, company ask themselves, do we get an ROI out of the sponsorship? And I think the first and maybe the best example is the HVB Sparkarte here in Germany, which is a product created by Hypovereinsbank, UniCredit, about 20 years ago. And they said, how can we really create a product which helps fans and is combined by all positive aspects of the sport within their partnership with Bayern Munich. And the idea was that fans that have the HVB Sparkarte profit from the goals that Bayern Munich is scoring. So if they score more than 10 goals, the interest rate rises, and so actually you get more money. So it's perfectly tied to the emotions of sports, and this product still works. And I think in sports industry it was a benchmark over many years till today. So you invest in sports and you actually get a return on investment, which is really measurable. And so many companies tried that, and since a decade we have a new playing field, which is digital communication.
Yes.
So now every federation, every club is mainly basically a media house. So they started building their own accounts. So they built the website, of course, they have newsletters, they have apps, and they have the whole social media playing ground. They started with Facebook and Twitter, and now Instagram, the Chinese platforms, TikTok, and so on. And big organizations, federations, and clubs, they have week by week hundreds and thousands of digital interactions and touch points with their fans. So in a sponsorship relationship, they bring additional value, really reach, and which is comparable also to traditional media. And that was a new playing field, also a new possibility to gain new revenues, to change contracts, and to upsell actually their fees. But what was also obvious is that they needed new skills. So it wasn't the same anymore selling a sponsorship, but they didn't just need the basic standardized packages, but what became more and more important is to provide individualized packages to the needs of the sponsor. And so it became more and more relevant to really collaborate between the club, the association, and the sponsor. And so throughout the decades, it changed a lot. And I think we are still just at the beginning of all of those changes towards a more individualized relationship and also sponsoring deal between club, federation, and sponsor. And so we are living, I think, in a very interesting time for this.
Perfect. Thank you. And when we look back at all the different phases of sponsoring, and you've touched on that, some of the companies are still based on, still in the first phase where it's just about the preference of a board member, and others are really evolving and coming to the co-creation, especially with the new generations on the new platforms such as TikTok last year, for example. Overall, and looking at our motto, lessons learned, what is the most critical lesson that a company needs to learn to stay relevant in sponsorship right now?
Well, many lessons, but maybe the most important is fans are smart and clever, and they have high expectations regarding sponsorship activation. So it's not just about I close a sponsorship deal as a company, and then I put the brand of the club on my products. This is not enough anymore. So, and also on social media, for example, you cannot just take advertising from TV and post the video on social media. So it's all about added value for the fan. What are the needs of the fans that can be provided, additional value that can be provided by the sponsor and the club together. And so what you just said is co-creation is the right topic. So you need the analysis of the needs of the fans, and who understands the fans' needs more than the club. So so people working in the club understand those needs the best. And so it's very important to work out together what can be provided to the fan. And I think if you take this approach, then you will get to the right answer. Additional value can be maybe a product, as I just said, the HVB Sparkarte, but it can also be emotional storytelling or information. So added values can be found on various places, but the approach needs to be different and always from the perspective of the fan at the end.
And that's what makes the sports industry so unique, is that a fan is extremely loyal to the club or the athlete he is a fan of, and that's totally different than in any other industry.
Right.
And as you said, the creation of sponsorship deals needs to go beyond just a mere reach of putting a logo somewhere, and it's all about off-event fan experiences, and then the co-creation. If we take a look at corporate social responsibility, to give some inputs, the amount of companies of the S&P 500 index which have published a corporate social responsibility report over in 2019 was 90% against 20% back in 2011. And also a recent survey states that 77% of consumers are willing and want to buy from companies which are doing something good for the world. As the CRS gains momentum, how can social impact be measured for companies and in sponsorship agreements? And is there a trade-off between digital KPIs and the social impact?
No. It's the perfect combination, actually. And I think pressure in society is rising regarding social impact, environmental impact, sustainability overall in all industries. And this is what we see in field of political communication and politics in general, but also across various industries, also in sports. And I think the need to adapt there is very high. And so we see, for example, EU is regulating more and more. Let's take a look at the ESG criteria, yes, where, for example, as a company, you can just get a bank credit if you fulfill those criteria. And what DFL does for the Bundesliga is now also to adapt to that if you want to be a club in the Bundesliga playing, you need to have at least a certain level in sustainability actions, environmental and social, which I think is a very good thing, because fans and society wants it anyway. So it will come anyway. And I think this is a huge pressure on sports in general, because it needs transformation.
Yes.
Strong transformation. And it needs transformation because of digital communication and digital fields, and also now more and more about sustainable topics. And we see already good examples, part here and there. For example, we had the Nordic World Championship, yes, in Oberstdorf this winter, spring. And of course, winter sport needs heat, and Fissmann, the heating system provider, is a big sponsor in winter sports overall. And they provided their newest heating systems to reduce carbon footprint around this World Championship, which is a small example, but with a very huge impact. And I think not every sponsor has heating systems, of course, no, but you have to be creative. And you also have to be creative as an club or federation to provide possibilities to work out together the right actions and sponsorship packages to meet those needs, and maybe to be a step ahead in comparison to others, and to provide openness also for companies and future sponsors, because everyone needs stories and everyone needs tangible and sexy stories. And the combination between sustainability and sports, and the meeting point is digital communication. So that's why it's not either or, but it's the perfect combination. But it's not easy to get there at the end. And so we need to see a lot of transformation in the next decade. And this is, I think, why it's so important what you do, and to bring in new ideas and to discuss this. And because I think transformation needs also new blood and new talents to really challenge the organizations to get to the next level.
Mm-hmm. And so we'll come to the change management aspect in about a second. But it also means that some companies need to use sponsorship agreements to act as a role model for society through what they do, right?
Yes.
Perfect.
Sports is always a role model. The greatest heroes in sports are role models for us, for our children, since decades. And so this is why sports can have such a huge impact in society.
Certainly.
And always has.
Yeah.
Always also for the good, also for changes that need to be done in society, and sports can help. And sometimes I think sports is not even, doesn't know how strong it can be also to help for positive changes that need to be done, like sustainability.
Yes, that's also what Philipp Lahm, who's currently working on the Euro 2024, told in his last interview, where he said that he discovered that the main power of sport and football is actually the amateur football and not necessarily the professional one. And we see it also with Paris 2024, where they have a director of impact. So it's all about the legacy of the games, both for the environmental legacy, also the economical, and also the societal legacy. And we see it also with the IOC, who launched the Young Leaders Program back in 2016. One question I would like to ask you is, should ethics become a growing concern for sports properties?
I think definitely, because they have to raise the topic way more on a higher level, because some organizations, they just take actions that are needed, but not one step further. So I think now also the question is, how can future sponsorships be closed? And like the question is always raised in organizations, do we really still need sponsorship activation? Or do we maybe invest our communication and marketing budget in different areas? Maybe also areas that are more sustainable or maybe more measurable, like easy Google ads, so we can very easy measure traffic or whatever KPI. And so many decision makers ask themselves, is it really the right investment? But I think yes, it is. If sports rights in terms of sponsorship activation are defined in the right way. And all examples that you just mentioned go exactly in this direction. The first steps, like Philipp Lahm, for example, always says, it's not just about professional football. Of course, there are role models for young kids, but are those players the same role models as 20 years or 30 years ago? I don't know. What he always says, and which is right, the gap between professional football and amateur football is growing. So they earn more and more money. Can really kids and also us, can we still identify ourselves with them anymore? I think that the gap needs to be closed, because the strength of sports, especially football, for example, is the integration of various people in one team,
yes,
which is so much needed in our society today. And so football and other sports can play such a big role, but executives need to not just talk about it, but really bring it into the DNA of organizations and execute it in a way bigger field than in the past. Mm-hmm. So it's not just about talking, it's about actions.
Mm-hmm. And if we talk about inclusion, but also maybe the difficulty that some people have to actually measure the impact of sponsoring, one aspect we've touched on is the co-creation. And to include everyone of society, then let's include the society in the first place. A great example of that was GoPro, back when they launched the GoPro, and then having the possibility of having everyone sharing his actions and the entire world. But also the German football club FC St. Pauli did that very well, and the My Football Club, which is an online platform to own a club.
Yes.
They have done that. And I'm citing at that point, the co-creation is inherently uncontrollable. All brands need to consider a strategy characterized by a mix of integration and some control combined with respectful observation and constructive transformation. Does that represent the most significant opportunity, but also challenge for companies and sport properties?
Yes, I think digital platforms and communication have a huge potential for also new ways of co-creation, because you have never been closer to your fans than ever before. Worldwide, 24/7. Because 20 years ago, you met them in your venue, once a week, twice a week, in winter sports just every half a year. But now you can get in touch with them anytime. And then examples that you just mentioned, but also maybe co-creating jerseys or other ideas. And there are good ideas and examples already out there. But I think you need a different skill set. You need different people. You need people that are able to listen in your online community and talk to them on the same level, and then integrate them in a long-term way. And it's not just we do this now for 2 weeks, but it's a long process that you really tie your community to your club, or also then involve the sponsor. And so great potential, but not everyone is making use out of this already.
Well, thank you very much. If that is the biggest opportunity and also challenge, it might be helpful to get in some new and fresh impulses, like we do for the sports industry. And let's talk about the generation set and the entire change management that might need to happen. And they have, or like one needs to realize that the generation set is actually growing and getting older, and the oldest generation set members are actually entering the labor market as young professionals. And how can companies leverage the entry of young professionals to bring in innovative ideas and maybe a new or like more profound market understanding?
Well, I have to say I love to work with young people. Mm-hmm. We have at LOBECO many young people, and what I think is very important is to listen. Because they have so many ideas. They don't have like decade of experience in the working industry, but they made their own experiences throughout their life and throughout their study time. And they are actually always, of course, also online working with all new applications and possibilities. And they have a new perspective on various industries, also on the sports industry. So I always love to learn and to listen from them. And if you listen and also take care about their ideas, then you can think of what can be integrated in the company. How could the company develop, and how could maybe also services, products, or whatever and change. So I think the most important thing is to listen and to learn, and then step by step integrate them in the company, and then give them more responsibility. You told me you're born in 2000, in the year 2000.
That's right.
So now I want to listen and learn. So what would you say for your generation? What is important if you want to enter the working market, especially in sports? What is important for you?
Well, I think one of the most important things is for us to be able to identify with the product, the service, and the company we're working with. I think it is also about having the feeling of being understood, at least listened to, and finding the right balance between maybe the naive opinions we have and the crazy ideas, but then also getting and learning from the top generation. But I think what will be very important is to see which company cultures actually find the right way to adapt to the younger generations, and let it be the technologies, the ethics. We've talked about the fact that we want to do something good for the world. I think these are going to be the greatest challenges for companies, but also for ourselves, to find the companies we fit into and where we are willing to invest our time on the long run.
Yeah, and I think that fits perfectly in what we just discussed, also about sports market. So I think for organizations it's a huge challenge, but also opportunity. If they change, then it's also like more likely that good talents in your age will join those organizations and companies.
Yes.
Right.
We've touched on a lot of things. We've touched on the change management. We have talked about the Generation Z, the co-creation, the different phases of sponsoring. And we are currently, and especially right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, in a time of crisis, of change, and also with new disruptive business models and new opportunities given by transformation, digitalization. Looking at the sponsoring as one section of the external communication of a company and one way to position itself on the market, how high is the pressure on decision maker to evolve their sponsoring strategies?
Dramatically increasing.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because everything changed. And just one example, we have more than 4 billion social media users worldwide.
Yes.
And a lot of content that you see out there is about sports. And as already said, every huge organization in sports is a media house and has a media house. And so just within 1 decade, everything changed. And partnerships, contracts, execution of the rights, everything changed. And now we will not see a stop or consolidation. I think it will change more and more because technology is changing, but also everything that we touched on about sustainability will bring a new playing ground, and everything will get more complex. And so decision makers need more skills also in their teams. On the sponsoring side, on the one hand, and also for clubs and federations. So decision makers need experts, people that understand digital platforms, content, storytelling, fans' needs, and everything about sustainability. What is really sustainability? What does ESG stand for, and how can it be implemented in my organization? And then how do we bring this together? The needs of the sponsors and the opportunities that rights holders can bring in, federations and clubs. So I think it needs to develop, because sometimes there are still people in charge that used to do this for decades, which is a good thing, but they need now to open up to all of those new possibilities. And some do and some don't. But at the end, they need new ideas and new skills in their teams. And again, that's a perfect opportunity for your generation to get in and to say, okay, I want to be an expert in this, and I want to bring sponsoring to the next level to get the right offers in place that new deals can be made.
Mm-hmm. So it opens up the opportunity for new business models and new experts, which act as a mediator between, on the one hand side, the knowledge, the product and the services of the companies, and on the other hand side, the market understandings, but also the understanding of the different platforms, the activation methods. That's also one thing you're helping us with the social media strategies.
Right. What we always say is, between the sponsor and the organization, federation, they need to create joint venture working groups that maybe even before the contract has been closed, they work out together based on the needs of the sponsor. How could the activation look like? And the closer they work together, not just before closing the contract, but also in the period of the contract, to really test and learn. And if such a working group is in place, I think the probability that the activation will be successful is much higher. And yes, we support also in this field to think about how, from a business model perspective, how the deal could look like, but also in terms of activation, what's the right offer also for the fan at the end, and how to bring both parties together, that they get in a mode of really actively working together.
Mm-hmm. And you help companies also with sponsoring, social media strategies, and we've touched on the development of sponsoring towards something more measurable, individualized, flexible, and also comprehensive. What is the biggest challenge decision makers face in their pursuit of driving change in sponsorship? And also, how can they align the innovative ideas with the current corporate culture?
I think this is what you said, tied together very closely. And so organizations that have an open-mindedness, also especially on the top level, CEO level, board members, they will drive change way more quickly in their organization. They will adapt to digital possibilities. They will adapt to all actions regarding sustainability, environmental, social, and good governance. If not, it's a problem. And that the head of sponsoring has a problem because he will not get the right new packages, individualized packages for the sponsors. So it's very important that the CEO is open, that new things will evolve, and that needs time, and that's a typical transformation process. But from the bottom, new good talents are needed, good ideas, new ideas are needed, so it's actually a top-down thing, but also bottom-up ideas, and then new things can emerge.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. One last question I would like to touch on. As I've previously said, the Impulse Summit 2021 is about lessons learned. So what have we learned for the sports industry, and what new, as I've said previously, the Impulse Summit 2021 is under the overarching motto lessons learned, and it is for us about setting new impulses for change for especially and mainly the European sports system for the years ahead. I wish LOBECO to be successful also in the next years, and I wish to the Impulse Network also to still have the conference in 25 years, in 2032. And, oh, das war falsch, muss ich nochmal machen, Entschuldigung. Es wird das 25. Summit, aber es ist in 21 Jahren.
Okay.
Genau. Ja. Dann fange ich einfach da wieder an. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I have one last question. I wish LOBECO to be successful for the upcoming decades, and I wish myself and the organization to still be here in 21 years and having the 25th Impulse Summit in 2042. I was wondering if the president of the organization comes once again in 21 years and sits down here with you talking about sponsorship, what is going to be the lessons learned from the last 2 decades, and what are going to be the phases of sponsoring at that time?
Oh, that's a long period.
That's a long period.
Well, I wish you best of luck for the Impulse Summit.
Thank you.
And hopefully you're at that time maybe like the Davos for what Davos is for economy, you're for sports industry, which is my wish for you. What about lessons learned and LOBECO? I don't know. If we look back now 3 years, no one would have imagined what happened. And the pandemic had such a huge impact also on sports business. It was like an innovation boost. So what we see also, our clients did things very bravely, which they have not done the years before, because it was just the last chance to communicate with fans. And so looking forward such a long time, it's very difficult. No one can even predict what is in 5 years. One thing, what I think will be way more important, is the role of China in sports. Mm-hmm. We will have the Olympic Winter Games now in Beijing, and China is investing heavily in sports. Now in winter sports, we know, of course, a lot in football, a lot in basketball, and for the government, all values in sports are very important to bring that in society. And on the other hand side, China is in many ways leading in technology. So we have an office there in Shanghai, and usually I'm 5 times per year there. I have not been there since 1.5 years, but every time I'm there and my colleagues show me the newest technology, innovation things and platform developments, I'm always fascinated, because they are so fast in also bringing in this technology in sports entertainment, and I think they will have a huge role in the way we look at sports, what we see in sports, from a technology perspective, and that will also change things here in Europe and worldwide. So, but I don't know in which direction actually, but we have to take a close look to China, maybe even more, because we were looking a lot on the US market, especially on sports, but we have to look also a lot to China, and that will change, and I hope we will still love sports the way we do now, and that the young generations like sports, not just electronic sports and esports, but they really go out and play football and basketball, handball, whatever. And then technology and emotions and sports, we can come together and help creating a better future for the world. That's my wish, but where we actually get out, I don't know.
You don't know. But to summarize, it means companies do not only need to become more agile or stay agile and adapt the internal corporate culture, they also need to be able to adapt to a potentially totally new societal culture. Because if we're entering if China is entering the market, and if companies are entering the Asian market in a broader sense, then they need to be very agile and able to integrate all the different aspects of culture in that way.
Yes, yes. And culture from China to Europe is a totally different thing, of course. And so also there, federations need to be open-minded, and also adapt to the Chinese culture and the way they consume sports and perceive content and also role models. It's a different game.
Yes, and which brings inevitably a great challenge for co-creation, because as we've touched on before, it is in some way uncontrollable, and it's about analyzing but then also having some type of control. Thank you very much for all your great insight. Do you have any questions?
Yes. What do you think will change maybe in the next decade, and what do you expect from the sports industry? Where do you look at from your perspective?
That's a great question. One thing we touch on during the summit is the role of ethics the role of ethics and fairness in competitive sports. We also touch on leadership and governance, and I think my wish and what will certainly evolve over the next years is, on the one hand side, the impact of sports for society, and for that having new structures, governance systems, financings which are more sustainable, which better reflect the current problems of society, and which actually bring a solution for that. And I think that's the evolution we will see over the next 2 decades. Not so much the technological aspects will certainly play a role, but I think the most important is sport becoming a role model for societal change.
Let's hope for the good.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. Thank you very much
for taking your time. I would like to thank you also for joining us today for this interview. Please find out more information about the interview, also the sources we have used on our website, and make sure to register for the Impulse Summit 2021, which is taking place on the 28th of October, and join us on LinkedIn and Instagram for the upcoming campaigns and all the different content pieces we will be publishing. Thank you very much.
Julien, it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.